Well, also in Ottawa, there was heated debate today in the House of Commons on the updated Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement. The Conservatives voted en masse against the new legislation this week, and Leader Pierre Poilievre said the bill imposes a carbon tax on the people of Ukraine.
The pathological obsession these Liberals have with carbon taxes has now reached a level where it is sick. To impose their destructive carbon tax on the people of Ukraine.
To turn down a free trade agreement with a beacon of democracy like Ukraine. What is up with that party? That's what Canadians want to know. And this carbon tax excuse, no one's buying.
Roman Waschuk is a Ukraine business ombudsman, a position that works for the Ukrainian government, and also a former Canadian ambassador to Ukraine. He joins us now from Toronto. Mr. Waschuk, it's good to speak with you again.
Great to talk to you.
Help me understand this. Free trade legislation, free trade deals, they're mutually negotiated. But Pierre Poilievre is saying that Canada is imposing a carbon tax on Ukraine while they have a knife to their throat. What's the truth of this?
Okay, just to note that, of course, I work with but not for the Ukrainian government. Yes. But the point here being that's a peculiar and kind of disappointing interpretation. The fact is that, yes, this was a mutually negotiated agreement, and that it simply says that both sides will consult on and promote the idea of carbon pricing. The fact is that Ukraine is in a free trade agreement with the EU. It's big and important neighbor, and is in discussions on accession. The EU is in the process of imposing a carbon tariff on goods that it imports, on things like steel, how much carbon went into making the steel. So Ukraine already has to factor carbon pricing into its foreign economic activities.
Right. So Ukraine, as I understand it, sir, essentially has four big goals right now: win the war, rebuild the country, join NATO, and join the European Union. And as you've pointed out, carbon pricing, adopting it in some form, is key to that. So this is something that years ago Ukraine has set as a path for the country, correct?
Correct. They've been in discussions on this, and in fact, they're trying to figure out how best to adapt to it, because they certainly don't want to be priced out of the European market in the short term because of inadequate carbon pricing policies. And ultimately, if accession talks succeed, they'll be part of that carbon pricing arrangement.
So what do you make of this political argument we're seeing here in Ottawa, and the decision by the Conservatives, who have loudly been supporters of Ukraine, to vote the way they did on a free trade agreement like this?
Well, it seems a rather narrow and not very globally minded approach to what is really a much bigger issue.
What do you mean by that? Which part of that is a much bigger issue?
The much bigger issue is the economic survival of Ukraine. I've just been in Toronto here attending the Rebuild Ukraine conference with a good representation from Canadian business. A number of big companies are involved already in helping Ukraine redirect its, for example, energy supply situation. Cameco is now Ukraine's exclusive supplier for uranium. And others are working on hydro projects. So there's a lot going on. That's the much bigger picture, and taking this very narrow and really kind of stretch interpretation seems driven by, well, certainly not by global geostrategic or geoeconomic considerations.
So, but just on this point, that the argument is that Canada is somehow forcing Ukraine to do this. But I guess in a way, and I even say forcing, because they are a democracy that has chosen this on their own, it would be the European Union rules that have kind of precipitated all of this, right? I mean, can they even join the EU, as they hope, without moving in this direction?
No, they cannot. And so that's already part and parcel of Ukrainian policy. So I think to say that this was imposed on Ukraine by Canada with a knife at their throat is dramatic, but quite inaccurate.
Okay, there is also some criticism coming from the Conservatives that the Liberals are putting forward this bill on free trade, but it will exclude things like arm exports. That won't be included in the legislation because there's an argument that Canada should up its military production to help Ukraine in its fight against Putin's Russia. What's your sense of how that is viewed in Ukraine? What's your thought on that particular aspect?
My understanding is that there are certainly no restrictions placed on arms exports under the Free Trade Agreement. It comes under the general considerations. And if you look at Canada's export statistics for year-to-date 2023, 2/3 of Canadian exports to Ukraine are arms and weapon systems.
Okay, so is this just a House of Commons thing, or is this a real thing? I mean, you've been an ambassador, you know how politics can be. Is this just one of those partisan attack wedge issues, or is this a real source of concern between Canada and Ukraine?
I think, substantively, there was a majority in the House of Commons to pass that piece of legislation. So to that extent, it is moving along. But it's kind of, as I say, disappointing, disquieting to see the issue instrumentalized for these sort of narrow, wedgy type attacks. I mean, I certainly think it behooves everyone across the partisan divides to take the high road when it comes to supporting a country that is in Ukraine's situation.
Roman Waschuk, former Canadian ambassador to Ukraine and Ukraine business ombudsman, thank you for joining us. I want to apologize for saying you work for the Ukrainian government. You are an independent office that works with the Ukrainian government. Thank you for correcting me. I apologize for my error there. Thank you, sir.
You're very welcome.